All right, so there's been a bit of a development in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. I do like to cover some of the bigger war stories and things like that. So, with Joe going to leave office in January, it seems like there's all sorts of changes going on in the actual theatre of war. So I thought we could talk about a few of those. The big one recently, I think it was announced on Saturday, certainly by Sunday, that the United States, the Pentagon, I doubt it's Joe himself making this call, highly doubt it.
Notoriously of sound mind.
Yeah. Great military strategist and tactician, Joe Biden. No, the Pentagon and the State Department, I suppose, gave Joe the green light to give Ukraine the green light that they could fire missiles with a longer range. They're called ATACMS, which is the Army Tactical Missile System, with a range of something in the order of 300 miles, something like that. Now, so they're not actually giant missiles. They're not sort of medium-range ballistic missiles even. And they quite often have a payload in the range of 300 to 500 odd pounds. So they're not giant missiles, but they're pretty big. Yeah. I mean, they're pretty big. So
in business.
Yeah, and the White House had always said, or the Pentagon, whoever is actually making all these calls, have given these systems to Ukraine, or allowed Ukraine to buy them off of them with the money they've given them, but not to actually fire them, or rarely to fire them. And Zelensky's been asking for permission to. I mean, talk about it's a pure proxy war, where you have to ask permission. Yeah. To do battlefield things. I mean, it's
also when all your arms and all your weapons come from one major source, they could just turn the key off and you can't use them.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. Also, there's other systems that the French and the British have given them, which we've also in line with saying you can use them now, because it seems like. Maybe not so much the EU as such, but certainly Britain and France, we take our foreign policy cues directly from the United States. Nearly always. Not always, but nearly always. So if the State Department or the Pentagon say something, we're just suddenly in line. Like that day, that moment. Pathetic, really. Really pathetic. So let's watch a couple of clips. So first one here then, I'll just play this.
Things are escalating in Eastern Europe, and President Biden is responding. Saturday night, Russia launched a massive aerial attack, taking out energy infrastructure and causing blackouts throughout Ukraine. On Sunday, Russia doubled down with a strike on a 9-story building that killed 10 people and injured more than 50. All of that, plus North Korean troops are positioned along the Ukrainian border. President Biden made a key decision to authorize Ukraine to use long-range U.S. missiles in its fight against Russia. That weaponry will allow Ukraine to strike targets deep inside of Russian territory, a capability that will better equip them to bring the fight directly to their Russian aggressors. Fox News correspondent Kevin Cork has more.
The decision allowing Ukraine...
Okay, we don't need to hear that, dude. Okay, so that's sort of the headline. That's where you start the story, the narrative. Talking about long-range missiles. It's not that long range. They can't get anywhere near Moscow, for example. No, we So the real question is, how bad is this? Are we now seconds away from disaster?
I see a lot of people are panicking about it.
Are we really on the brink of World War III? Or is it not really, I mean, tactically, really that much of a big deal? So that's what I just want to talk about in this segment.
Yeah, of course.
So not obviously, but the mainstream media and all sorts of people, the knee-jerk reaction, especially when you hear what Moscow and Putin's saying about it, is to be alarmed. It is a bit alarming, isn't it? It is an escalation. But I suppose, spoiler alert, to cut to the chase, the actual military analysts say it's not really that much of a game changer. Really. For a few different reasons. They're really expensive. They're like $1 million a piece. There's not that many of them. Yeah. They're not that long a range. Russia can do all sorts of countermeasures, so it's not crazily destructive and all sorts of things. One thing before we go on, I mentioned North Korean troops. That's a quirk, isn't it? I just want to spend a moment talking about that. What a weird quirk that is. Again, just 6 months ago or a few months ago, if you'd asked me, would that be a thing? I would have said no. No way. What, Russia, actual Russia, in the Donbass region or in the Kursk region would use North Korean troops, or that North Korea would allow that to happen. No way, that's crazy. And yet here we are. There's I think there's supposed to be about 12,000 is the number I've heard bandied about. It might even be in one of the clips we've got. 12,000 North Korean infantrymen in the Kursk region.
That's a big number. I've
It's
heard
quite a lot.
more,
It's a lot. Yeah.
but it's a big number. Yeah. And I wouldn't expect it, to be honest.
Oh, right.
But also back to what you said before, I think at some point we get desensitized, and people generally speaking get desensitized, because if you follow the news, the world is literally about to be destroyed every day. So at some point I just shut down and just stop listening to it. It's just I'm much more likely to think that it's people just are projecting might with statements.
You do get sort of desensitized to almost anything quite quickly. I remember in the days and weeks after 9/11, sort of glued to it for the first few days, and then weeks start ticking by, and you're like, okay. With the COVID thing, at first it seemed alarming. I never had the vax, but in the first few days of it, it seemed very alarming, and in the end you just get saturated with the alarm, and you're like, okay, I don't care anymore. I mean going to Vatican City in Rome, walking around the Vatican, which is obviously filled with art treasures, absolutely filled with it. And within a few hours, you're just like, yeah, another Caravaggio,
Yeah.
Oh yeah, another original Michelangelo piece, yeah, okay. Like you can't help it. It's human nature, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, you have.
And this has been going on for like 2.5 years now. I think they're closing in on like the 1,000th day of this conflict. And of course, in a more general sense, the conflict, quote unquote, has been going on much longer than that, many years, really. And then when something like other flashpoints flash up, like in Israel or in Yemen or something, and people take their eyes off this particular conflict, and then I can see how people are tired of it, absolutely. So anyway, the headlines have been that there's this massive escalation, and Putin might nuke Kiev or might nuke
we hear about
who knows
this
what, or
all the time.
at any moment. He's got his finger hovering over the button.
I mean, this I don't believe this.
No.
I don't believe this, because if
serious analysts say there's no.
I mean, he would have done it now.
And it's counterproductive
But also,
in orders of magnitude. Yeah, you don't achieve anything. He'd get himself
and do it right now, where there are the prospects of the war ending have never been better.
Right. Yeah.
Seems like just panicking.
Yeah. No. All the serious military analysts say, despite the saber rattling, despite what Putin says, he's not going to nuke anyone.
Yeah.
Or rather, it's extremely unlikely. Because it's counterproductive, because sort of NATO and the United States, their doctrine is that they would have to sort of nuke him back. So it's like mutually assured destruction, all that sort of Cold War stuff. It's just not on the cards. I don't think that might age very badly and find ourselves in a nuclear winter this time next week. Fingers crossed we don't. Let's keep everything crossed we don't.
If we're massively wrong about this, no one is going to tell us.
Right, yeah.
No one's going to say, Sibo, you were wrong.
I'll have a 6-minute warning to sit at home saying, yeah, that will age badly. Oh, yeah, but no one's going to watch it again. So, all right, let's listen to this little clip where they talk about the attackums.
Pleas from the Ukrainians. America has finally allowed Ukraine to use US missiles to strike deep inside Russian territory. So is this the game changer that could turn the tide in Kiev's favor? The Americans had already provided Ukraine with the MGM-140 Army tactical missile system, but there were limitations on its use. Known as ATACMS, they're long-range ballistic missiles that can strike targets 186 miles away with a warhead that can hold about 375 pounds of explosives. ATACMS...
Just to quickly say, they keep calling it a long-range missile. It's not that long-range. Technically, it's a ballistic missile. Well, it absolutely is a ballistic missile, but it's, people might hear that and think of intercontinental ballistic missiles that can go thousands of miles or can hit anywhere in the world. That's absolutely not what this is, right? It's not. But if you weren't careful or you weren't listening carefully, then you might think, oh, like the big one, like the old school Cold War giant thing. It's not really anything of that order. But anyway, let's carry on.
Can have two types of warhead, a single high explosive variant, as well as a warhead that can carry cluster munitions. Ukraine has said they could be used to stop or slow down troop movements or destroy Russian air or military bases, which would help Ukraine in the defense of its own territory. And this map shows how far the missiles could reach inside Russia and the potential targets. They include airfields, ammunition warehouses, radars, and missile bases. Now, on the face of it, it's a big military edge, but the Russians are already responding by moving hardware and personnel out of range. The Biden administration has made clear it's the presence of North Korean troops here in the Kursk region that pushed them to change their minds on the use of ATACMS. It means the Ukrainian army can now use them to repel Russia's anticipated counteroffensive in Kursk. Ukraine captured this territory in August and is now attempting to defend it. President Biden's decision will likely see the British government follow suit, allowing the use of its Storm Shadow missiles. Storm Shadow has a shorter range, about 155 miles, and it's launched from an aircraft. But the Russians are furious, seeing this latest development as a major provocation as it crosses some of Putin's red lines. They've not made clear how they'll respond, but a response is coming. It could take the form of support for the West's enemies or even a cyber attack on its interests.
Okay, so a bit there. Just to mention the Kursk region again, the Ukrainians pushed into that only in August this year, so it's a relatively new development. Now, I think that, and I'm not the only one here, this is not some sort of crazy insight that the brilliant mind of my own came up with. I think a lot of people think this and say this, that when Trump gets in office, he will try to, he's promised, and I believe him, he will at least try to broker a peace, broker some sort of deal. And he's quite good, like him or loathe him, he is quite good at cutting deals. Russia have wanted peace since winter 2022. It's only the Ukrainians sort of refusing to, and I understand why they would, because they've lost a big chunk of their country. If the Donald can get them round a table and strike some sort of peace, from Putin's point of view, from the Kremlin's point of view, they're going to want Kursk back. I really doubt Putin will sit down and hash out some sort of peace with Kiev whilst he's lost Kursk. So, if that is the case, it seems likely, I mean, all that sort of stands to reason, I would have thought it's fair to say. He's going to want to push them out of Kursk before then. So he's got between now and January to do that. It seems what it is. And I think everyone knows that, really. Ukraine know that, the State Department, the Pentagon know that. That's why they've let them use these missiles, particularly in the Kursk region.
That's all
everyone knows
going to be focused.
Right, exactly. The focus of this conflict now is there, it seems.
Because if they have zero incentive to do it in another region of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's going to be there.
I mean, maybe another clip later on, but they were saying that it's something in the order of 1,200 casualties a day in this conflict. That's not small beans. No. 1,200 a day. That's big. That's a big. Yeah. It's one of those things where you see clips coming out of this war. People, you might see various clips on Twitter and on the news. And it still seems sort of fairly remote. Well, it is kind of remote. And it seems like it's not necessarily, like a kick-ass, skull-crushing, World War I style attrition, artillery exchanges, trench lines. You see a bit of that, but I don't anyway, even though I watch a lot of this stuff, you don't really get the impression of 1,200 odd casualties a day. A day.
That's too much.
It's a full-scale war. It's not just like this thing bubbling over and sometimes there's some exchange of artillery and the odd sniper shot and the odd drone here or there. No, it's sort of full blown.
And also, I think if we focus on the number, warfare isn't what it used to be 100 years ago, in terms of numbers,
of course,
of casualties and stuff. So for someone who is a World War One or World War Two aficionado, for instance, they may hear 1,200 and they say it's not particularly big, but it is a big number.
Oh yeah, it is big, yeah. And I mean, to compare anything to World War One is World War One was sort of, in terms of just pure battlefield soldiers, unprecedented. Yeah. There was more casualties in World War Two, but a lot of those were civilians, and it wasn't in sort of such a concentrated. It wasn't as concentrated as a battlefield thing. So anyway, the thing I think is another interesting thing is that I've probably said it too many times already, but I'm fascinated by the parallels in history, or the echoes from history. So the idea that Russians are fighting in and around Kursk, for example. I mean, anyone who doesn't know, the biggest battle of all time, or set of battles, were at Kursk in World War II.
You have an e-books about it, haven't you?
Yeah. Where is it? Oh, there it is. So I did a 2-part series in conversation with Mr. Carl Benjamin. There's a part 1, the biggest battle of all time, Kursk, where the Germans and the Nazis and the Soviets faced off. Some of the biggest tank engagements, some of the biggest aerial engagements took place at Kursk in 1943, was it? So to still be fighting there, it's interesting to me. I just think it's interesting, worth saying, or spending a minute or two, that there's certain places in the world where there's just always conflict, because even going back to time immemorial, I mean, the Mongols are not pretty much razed, kind of annihilated Kiev in the 14th century. That part of the world, that sort of Eurasian steppe, endlessly, literally since time immemorial, since before Herodotus, they have steppe peoples coming through the Yamna people, the Scythians, whatever, coming through that area of the world around the river Dnieper, I think the D is silent, right, on the river Dnieper, which is exactly where this conflict is now, right? I mean, again, in World War II, there was 3 battles of Kharkov. Yeah. The second was the biggest one, the Kharkov Pocket. Sort of over 250,000 Soviets. They went back and forth past Kiev multiple times. I think there's 3 battles of Kiev. Certainly 2 big ones. Like places like the Mesopotamian deserts. Yeah. I always thought it was interesting, crazy, bizarre, that in my lifetime there've been more than one giant conflagrations and battles raging up and down the Tigris and the Euphrates, where there has always been war. Yes. It seems, right? Going back to the Sumerians, going back to the age of Akkad, and you can only imagine before that as well, right? So anyway, that part of the world where modern day Ukraine is, and Belarus, that part of Eurasia, it's unfortunate, really. I feel very, very sorry for those people. And going up into sort of where modern day Poland is, just perennial conflict. Hopefully it can be brought to an end early next year. But it seems like, because what often happens not always, of course, but what often happens in wars is that the amount of casualties, if you're going to plot the casualties on a graph, it goes up right at the end. Yeah. Not always at all. World War I and World War II are examples of that. If you look at the number of deaths in 1945, it spikes. I think, unfortunately, I feel like that's what's going to happen here, because both sides desperately want to get some sort of objectives before the Donald forces them to, or the United States forces them to stop.
I think one of the reasons why, this makes perfect sense, but one of the reasons why the Ukrainians may want that region and also to intensify their presence there is to make potential swaps, because they could get it, they could occupy it, and they say, okay, if you want me to give it back to you, right, you'll have to give me some other lands back.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So if, as you said, Trump gets them to the table of negotiation, they could say, well, we don't want to be talking just as the people who have lost 2 regions. We also want to gain another region and possibly do swaps.
Yeah. yeah. I mean, that's
because it's quite unforgiving, what's going on, because when you have a major power that wants to end the conflict, they want to talk about an antebellum balance. They want to say, okay, right, what happened, let's end it right now. But the Ukrainians want the land they've lost, so if they can't get it back for 2.5 years now, perhaps the idea is to just rush to get another part of Russia and make swaps. Yeah. I mean, so I think that a lot of people, some people, they're sort of used to how World War One and World War Two ended, and many big wars, the way the American Civil War ended. It's in one side's abject defeat and complete unconditional surrender. Most wars don't end that way. Throughout the sweep of human history, most wars end in some sort of negotiated peace. If you take, for example, the Vietnam War, where lots and lots of stuff was done on both sides for years, just in order so that when they did finally get round a peace table, they've got a stronger hand in negotiation. It's crazy to think that wars can go on for years and thousands of men can be killed, an untold amount of treasure and material used up, just so you've got a slightly stronger negotiating position in Paris or London or wherever it is, wherever you do the deal. It seems like something like that is, I feel like something like that, we're now in that stage where Ukraine wants to have a card in their back pocket of maybe Kursk. Russia don't want them to have that card at the table, the peace table eventually. All that sort of thing's going on. So there's one quick point I wanted to point out here, is when we look at the map, you can see here this March 2022, i.e. very soon after it started. And then in very broadly speaking, hasn't been giant movements. So, I mean, well, you could argue that's not the case, because this is quite a very zoomed out map. These are big chunks of land. But if you look at November 2022, right, it's not in any profound sense any different to now, really. So again, very, very broadly speaking, you've still got the Donbass and Crimea is still in Russian hands. And the fact of the matter is, the battlefield reality is that despite the United States and other countries giving Zelensky tens of billions of dollars, untold amounts of men or material and training and things, and the sort of disgusting number of Ukrainian casualties, all their counter-offensives haven't really come to a great deal, have they? I mean, it's a difficult conflict. I think I have two things to add here. It seems to me that first of all, we need to talk about the panic that a lot of people are spreading about Trump, because they're saying that with Trump you have the rise of power in dictators, and you have bullish behavior. Assuming that they are mentioning Putin, the annexation of Crimea happened in 2014. Am I wrong?
Is that right?
Yeah, it happened under Obama, not under Trump.
Okay, the little green men, the original thing, right?
Yeah, I think that was 10 years ago. And then the war right now happened under Biden. So the idea that bullying has come back under Trump it's completely mistaken in the geopolitical sphere. Now, I don't know, what I hope is that Trump is going to somehow help end the conflict, but also end the conflict in a way that doesn't completely destroy Europe. Because what I don't want to happen is, I don't want essentially the Western camp to suffer what the communist camp suffered in the early 70s with Nixon and Kissinger, who divided Russia and China. I don't want any kind of division between the US and Europe of that sort. Now, maybe this may be sort of a panicked thing to say, but this is something that I'm just saying that I don't want something like that to happen.
Fair enough. No, I mean, fair enough. I don't entirely agree, but okay. I mean, coming from Greece, it's a different thing. Greece is on the front line with Turkey. It's sort of on the front line, and like you very much appreciate I imagine, the umbrella of NATO. Whereas being a Brit with the Royal Air Force, and the British Army and our nuclear submarine program, I feel less. I care about NATO less.
I mean, that's a conversation for another matter. But just one thing to say.
Oh, different thing.
The NATO clause that didn't work in Cyprus since 1974.
Right.
We have to say this because there seems to be a sort of NATO clause of NATO member states need to guard each other when a country is under attack. They didn't help Cyprus in 1974. So that's where NATO didn't actually act as it was supposed to. Yeah. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, the United States didn't help, or NATO didn't help in the Suez crisis in the 50s for Britain. Just stood back and watched that. They did as little as they possibly could in the Falklands. The United States, I mean, not necessarily NATO, but eventually, after Margaret Thatcher actually pulled the trigger on the Falklands, then they were like, okay, we'll allow it. It's like, we've already started. Thanks for doing nothing running up to it. Thatcher went to the United States, like the UN, and said, are you going to help us out? And they were like, no, don't do it. Yeah. Let the Argentine aggression go. And Thatcher said no, and sent a flotilla down there, battle group. And then they were like, oh, all right then, go on then, we'll allow it. Anyways, all right. So, a couple last points just to make is just what will happen after the peace? Because eventually this war will end, right? Like Kilgore in Apocalypse Now. This war is going to end someday. Yeah, they always do. They always will. What will become of Zelensky? I mean, AA has said that after the war comes to an end, they'll memory hole it. I think that's actually half decent take. I've been rude about AA's takes in the past. I do kind of take that back. Sometimes he's got some really good takes. I think that's probably what will happen. Biden will be out of office. Trump will make some sort of brokered peace, and the whole thing will be memory hold. Don't worry about where all those billions went. Don't talk about all the Ukrainian and Russian casualties. Don't worry about it anymore. Just move on to the next thing.
I mean, people forget.
And the idea of we're there for as long as it takes. We don't worry about it. We didn't really ever. I think that's what's going to happen.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, it's not that I'm pro-Kremlin or pro-Putin. I'm really not. But I don't support Zelensky. No, I don't buy the narrative that Putin, once he's won in the Donbass, will push on into Belarus and Poland and the Baltics. I don't buy that. No.
We'll see. I hope it's not true. Yeah, I hope it won't happen.
Right, no. And so, like, the sort of kind of unbelievable amount of basically corruption, the whole Burisma angle. I mean, just look at that image. I mean, it says 1,000 words, doesn't it? But these people have done a terrible thing. At least for if you remember Boris deliberately scuppering any sort of peace deal quite early on. Like, what they've done is a disgusting thing, because I say I'm not on board with Zelensky or the Ukrainian government. I don't care where Ukraine's borders are, particularly. I care about the completely innocent civilians, Ukrainian civilians and soldiers that have died unnecessarily. That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. Like, one of the clips we watched earlier is that Russia launched a missile and it hit some building and there were 10 casualties, or 18 casualties. It's easy just to say that and go, oh yeah, right, yeah, next thing, yeah. But no, wait. There's like women and children blown to smithereens, blown into chunks of viscera. Like, that's terrible. If we can bring that to an end, the fact that these guys didn't bring that to an end sooner, that's the bad thing.
I really want it to end. No, I really want it.
Yeah, please. And like, getting up there smirking about it, laughing about it, LARPing as some sort of military. Look at these people. Look at these hawks, these murderers.
I have to say this because I hear this. I mean, I don't
look at them. It's all a joke. It's all a laugh.
I don't know about this, but I have some Ukrainian friends that I haven't been able to come into contact with ever since the war began, because they went there to fight, and we've essentially I can't contact them anymore. And they told me that they thought highly of him, of Zelensky.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on behind closed doors and stuff, but they seem to have a tremendous amount of rivalry with the Russians, and the memories of Holodomor actually make a lot of them. I can't speak for everyone. I'm just saying what was communicated to me. They literally don't think that this is a war that the US is forcing on them. That they want to fight it. They want it. That's what they told me. Just
okay. Well, they're doomed to lose, I'm afraid.
I just hope the war ends. I just hope
me too. Yeah. I mean, the story goes back to sort of the 8th, 9th century. I've got a great bit of content. I think it's a great bit of content of me in conversation with Apostolic Majesty talking about it. Because you remember when Tucker went and spoke to Putin. Putin started his narrative, I think, in the 8th, 7th or 8th, 9th century.
Oleg the Great or something.
Yeah. It goes back well over 1,000 years. The animosity, the rivalry between the people that inhabit what today we call Ukraine and the people who inhabit what today we call Russia. Of course, none of those things existed in the 9th century or whatever. But so it's died in the wall. It's deep down. I get that. But it needs to end. There's the political will in the Kremlin to not give up and retreat. He's not going to give up Crimea. So how many Ukrainian civilians and soldiers need to die then? Now, that's the thing. So I just think, again, future generations will look back at this Russian-Ukrainian conflict much the way we look back at something like World War I, thinking it was largely, almost if not entirely, unnecessary. It was certainly way more bloodier than it needed to be. People at the top were just callous, unbelievably callous, and flippant with other people's lives. Sad, really, isn't it? It's all a big joke. Meanwhile, Zelensky has enriched himself massively. He's a very, very rich man now, somehow. Guess that just happens, doesn't it? Yeah, and let's not talk about the Burisma angle at all. That's just a footnote that you're not really supposed to bring up anymore. And the last thing to say then, just on it, is that about these attackums, Putin is annoyed. And he had a press conference talking about, we're going to change our entire nuclear doctrine. We're not going to tell you exactly how we're going to change it, but we're going to tweak it and change it. Saber rattling, talking about nukes. It's just almost certainly not going to happen. And he is annoyed by it, as you can imagine. If you were pro-Kremlin, or you was on that side of the aisle, this would be a provocation. He's called it an escalation and a big, profound provocation, and from their point of view it is. But we'll see how it plays out between now and January. I think there's going to be a lot more stuff go down in that theatre of conflict between now and January, because they know that Trump's coming and will sort of try everything he can, all the levers, all the pressure points he can to sort of stop it. And so you want the best hand possible at that time.
Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to support us, and we'd really appreciate it if you did, go over to lotus.com, sign up for only £5 a month, and watch Bo's incredibly detailed series on the life of Julius Caesar. In this one, part 10, he's discussing what happens when Caesar goes to Britain. Like I said, part 10. This is how deep we end up getting into these subjects. And of course, go over to X, formerly Twitter, and follow us at lotusseaters_com.